All right. All right, let's get started. We could start by talking about any of our Christmas hymns this morning. Anybody have anything they want to share? Thoughts, questions? Anything? Noah texted me this week. He's like, I'm running out of Christmas songs because he likes to do different ones every Sunday. I was like, you could repeat them. Go ahead, Marion.
I don't know why I feel funny in the hymn "Come Adore the Humble King" where it says "Hail the Little Savior."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that feels strange to me.
It does seem to be it just the way it reads in English would seem, but here's the thing, I'll flip that around. It seems nearly impossible to me that the hands that crafted the world were born as a baby. But think about this, that's only revealing something of his birth. But the hands that crafted the world were crafted in Mary's womb too, right? I don't know, the whole thing is, those words don't bother me as much, because when you start to think about what it means for the Word to become flesh, to dwell amongst men, and for the almighty, infinite, all-powerful God to take on human flesh from conception, I think maybe part of it too for us, and I think this is a reasonable thing, is because of the way we know humans are constructed. This is not a communication of denigration at all, but to say we understand the male body to be strong and to protect and to cover women and children and all those things. In somewhere in our mind, I don't know that we struggle all that much with Jesus being a man so much because of male physique, right? There is some sense of authority and power with that. But to think of Jesus as a child, as a baby, as an embryo, that's different. So the phrase doesn't bother me nearly as much, only because there's a mystery and wonder to that whole thing, that getting your mind around, it's true. The same one who hung on the cross, bearing the weight of my sin, is the same one born of Mary in a stall. It seems hardly...
It's just that religion kind of denotes weakness.
Well, Marion, I might offer, I'm going to try not to preach my sermon for next Sunday, which you guys always seem to do to me.
I felt exactly the same way this morning.
I'll just say, next Sunday's sermon is all about the humility of Christ. And I don't mean humility just in a countenance sense, but almost the word humiliation. And that's actually, that's actually a historical term used about Jesus, the humiliation of Christ, right? From beginning to end. Again, I'm trying not to preach next Sunday's sermon, but...
But at the same time, that word little in this context would mean, it's very hard to wrap our brains around the fact that Christ as an infant would have been incredibly dependent upon his parents, even though he is the mighty Savior. And
Yeah.
it is.
Even that part in Isaiah 7, that's why I wanted to read that. There's something, before he could even choose the good and not the evil, right? And reject the evil, right? There's something about him coming of age and growing up in wisdom and stature as the new, right? There's all those parts of it. It isn't true indeed. The God of all creation became man to dwell among us, and part of that becoming man to dwell among us was little, dependent, all those things. I don't know. It doesn't bother me that way. Look, if that were the only thing we said, I could probably have an issue with it some way or another. But if you look at it now I'm trying to find it. Hail the little Savior. The word before it is majesty. The two phrases after, God has come with us to dwell, right? We're trying to make sense of a juxtaposition on an eternal scale that we just can't make sense of. Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
story is a paradox.
From beginning to end.
Yeah, a king who's humble,
Yeah, right.
savior,
Yeah,
little,
yeah,
God with us.
yeah. Yeah, good point. Probably no matter which phrases you want to put in there, you're going to find some human inconsistency or human, it's going to be illogical in a human sense, yet understood through the story that God has planned for us. Yeah, that's a good point. The whole thing is paradox from beginning to end. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't you also say that there was nothing about Christ's birth that was grand though? So like,
You're not going to preach next week's sermon for me.
I'm just saying.
You're not going to do it.
I'm just saying.
We're going to look at that first part of Luke 2 next week. And I will just tell you what you're going to see is there is nothing grandiose about it. Nothing. I know that's what you're saying. That's next week's sermon.
It's in the Bible.
Did one of you two want to say something? Dennis, did you want to say something?
I don't know, it's not a question, maybe a comment, or you can expound on it. But like, you know, the fact that Jesus.
Hey, what Fortosis always does is he'll say, "Do you think?" and then he'll make a comment. So you can do that, okay?
So I'm speaking on behalf
Dave, yeah.
but like you know, like with the people we just were reading about it in the crowd, you know, in the crowds, like Jesus, he's son, he thinks he's God. We know his parents. We saw, you know, these people, they saw him growing up.
Yeah.
He's a kid. He's
Yeah.
a guy now. He's a man. The whole experience of him, because God could have just made him.
Right.
He could have been
Right.
Jesus, like the big man.
Right,
And he still could have been fully human,
Mhm.
right? He could have, because God could. There's nothing God can't do.
right.
So there was a purpose.
I want to talk about that in a second.
Expound on that.
We're gonna talk about that one in a minute, but go ahead.
Yeah, there was a purpose for him to be lowly
Right,
and to be raised
Right.
from an infant to a man.
right,
Not so much that God didn't have to do it.
right.
It was just, I don't know.
Okay, okay, great. Do I think, great, here we go. I'm putting words in your mouth now. To be able to confess and profess that he's truly God and truly man, if God had made him on Monday, rode into Jerusalem, died on Friday, rose on Sunday, a few days later, went back to heaven, confessing him as truly man would be extraordinarily difficult. But we can say he's truly man because he was born of a virgin, born under the law, right? As Paul says in Galatians 4, right? So because of all those things, we can confess truly God and truly man, two natures in one person. And part of that is the way he was born, the way he came to be. All right, now that you brought it up, I want to talk about verse 37. Now, I know you were just saying stuff, Dennis, so I don't want to pick on you on this. But what Dennis said is a very common thing and often a way we communicate, which is very, very important. The verse says, "For nothing will be impossible with God." Or as some of your translations may read, "For nothing shall be impossible with God." As I said in the sermon, the verb that's used there indicates a future indicative tense, meaning future, looking forward. But here's the thing. We often take this to say, there's nothing God can't do. But that actually isn't true. There are things God can't do, believe it or not. And the best way to summarize those things is that God cannot do anything that is contrary to his nature. The writer of Hebrews tells us, Paul tells us in other ways, God cannot lie. Why? Because it's contrary to his nature. Okay? So, and there's other things like that. God can never cease being God, contrary to his nature. The one who is from everlasting to everlasting never ceases to be himself from everlasting to everlasting. So the reason why that's important is because when we say there's nothing God can't do, we're often speaking sort of in like a humanistic, physical, materialistic sense, right? And in that sense, we can say what we're speaking to is the omnipotence of God. God is all powerful in that he is able to do all things within creation that he chooses to do. But this is why I actually think this verse is so important. The way I tried to do it quickly, and maybe I went too fast on it, but when you parse out the words, this doesn't happen to me too often, but as I have the Greek there, and I'm looking at what this says, and I was like, the English doesn't actually communicate one of the words that's there in the Greek. Now, ready, Marion? The word is rhema, which means declaration, or like decree. You know that word? I don't know if that's the same word now, but this is in the Old Greek, right? How would you say it now?
Rima.
Rhema. Okay, so it's very similar. Okay, it's a declaration. It's a saying or a decree. If you look at verse 37, there's nothing about this that indicates a decree of God. Right? That's why I said we almost always take this in some sort of like a physical action, doing, causing something like that. But really, what's being communicated there is, for nothing that God decrees, he can't do. Or not that he can't do, but he won't do. That's what's being said there. And that's why I actually think if you translate it that way and understand it that way, what's being said by Gabriel there to Mary is, God has said this is going to be so. This is what's going to happen. Nothing God says that is going to happen is not going to happen. That is an interesting way of communicating this. Because we can't take verse 37 to mean God can't do anything. No, there's nothing God can't do, because we actually know that's not true. Not that God is limited in power, but he's limited in scope because of his own nature. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting part of this, something we don't really talk about much within this part of the story. And quite frankly, it's much more comforting for us to pull a verse out and say, well, there's nothing impossible with God, right? When we think about our own things. And instead, I'd want to say back to you, nothing that God has decreed or promised will ever fall by the wayside. He will do every single thing he has said he will do. And that's what this is communicating, because that's what I think was being communicated to Mary. Okay? Thoughts, questions? Did you want to say something? Okay. Anybody? Tom, you want to say something?
It's a weird question, or I don't know if it's...
Well, this is, if you look, this is the place for weird questions, I think.
So,
The only place for weird questions more appropriate than this is Entrusted, right?
yeah. So I guess if I had read all the other accounts, I might have the answer for this. But reading this account, do you think that she became pregnant in the 6th month?
Good question.
But it was Elizabeth's 6th month.
It was Elizabeth's 6th month.
I know, but it says now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent in verse 26.
That's probably a calendar month. Yeah.
June.
No. No, remember we're not going off a Gregorian calendar. That doesn't come about for another couple hundred years.
Okay.
We're going off the Jewish calendar
June
here.
to December was less than 9 months.
Yeah, look, I just had was that with you about the 25th? I didn't have that conversation about, somebody I had a conversation with this week about how we should remember there's nothing, who was I talking to? There's nothing historically, biblically significant about December 25th. Nothing.
You faded out, couldn't hear you.
There's nothing biblically and historically, nothing biblically, historically, yes, biblically significant about December 25th. And look, December 25th was chosen based on some of those dates, Tom, but whoever I was talking to, it was in relation to a conversation about we should always have church every year on Christmas Day. That was you? You and I talking about that? And I understand the desire and affirm the desire to worship on the day we set aside every year to remember the advent of Christ. But I don't think we could ever pinpoint December 25th. And I mean, here's the other thing too, Tom. I don't know my Jewish months very well at all. I could probably name you 3 of them.
Yeah, that was the only thing. I'm not concerned about the date when
Yeah.
you ask people, and that doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
Just the time frame from June to December, if it was in December or near December.
Yeah.
That was less than 9 months, and that was the thing I was trying to figure out. If he had told her this a year prior to it actually happening, or when, and
Yeah.
I forget, I know if you read through, I think it talks about when Jesus is born compared to Elizabeth, giving birth to. I think it's pretty close in time or
It's
something.
only 3 months apart. The 6th month is referring to the verses before of Elizabeth's pregnancy. She was pregnant 5 months, and then in the 6th month, the angel told
yeah.
Mary. There, Jesus and John are only about 3 months.
3 months apart. And we know that's true because Mary goes to visit Elizabeth before Elizabeth delivers, and John leaps in the womb of Elizabeth at Mary's coming. So, yes, ma'am.
But there are some people that this does bother, because I had a Jehovah Witness therapist,
Yeah,
and they don't celebrate Christian holidays,
correct.
because Christmas was not,
Well, I mean, there's a,
because it's not December,
yeah.
according to the Bible, and so we're all messed up.
Yeah, there's a couple things driving that. One, they don't celebrate any human dates. I don't know, birthdays, holidays, anything. Right? Exactly. But no, definitely not. But you have to remember the reason why they're called Jehovah's Witnesses is because they believe that the Christian church has stolen Jehovah's glory. And so their mission is to return people to worshiping Yahweh, Jehovah, and his glory, not Jesus. That's why then, after believing that, then Charles Taze Russell went back and changed the translation of the Bible. So now instead of the word made flesh and was God and was with God, it's now a God, was a God. So ideology drives all of that theology, not the other way around. But they don't celebrate any of those dates.
No, but
Yeah.
he specifically would mention Christmas to me.
Sure.
You know, we can't celebrate any of that.
You're right. Yeah.
Christmas is not, you people are all messed up.
Well, they would say we're all messed up for a lot of reasons, but this is definitely one of them. That's
Well,
right.
they say they're messed up.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Anyway, anything else on the verse 37? Nothing shall be impossible with God? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Can, can you just extrapolate that that it means more of a declarative thing when you go back to Mary's thing about how she was troubled at the saying, like, because it's a declaration. Gabriel's declaring God's going to do this.
100%.
You could, okay.
100% you can. Yeah. Because if you think about it, if you just look at the overall structure of this passage, the angel comes to her in verse 30, it comes to her in 28, she responds, or she's thinking about it. 30, 31, 32, 33 is the declaration of the angel, right? But what is being said here is the Lord is with you, right? The angel has come to make a declaration. She's troubled at the saying, right? The Lord is making a declaration to her. And that's at the end, right? There's no declaration God makes that's impossible for him. But also, I do think we should write. Yeah, go ahead, Jim. No, go ahead. No, that's all right. I'm just talking.
So in verse 38, Mary says, behold, the bondservant of the Lord may be done according to your declaration.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same.
Same word. Same word. Yeah, it's not logos there, it's declaration. Yeah, exactly. Let it be unto me according to what you have declared to come to pass.
No declaration the angel says is impossible with God.
Exactly. You see how all that fits together when you see it that way? I think it is so odd. I don't know how else to say this. I think it is so odd that all the translations just totally miss that word. I don't understand it. I suspect. Okay, let's just do a little bit of etymology and translation here for a second. Did you want to say something? Did I cut you off, Tom? Okay. There is only one English translation that I know of that uses the word slave. And it was just published a couple of years ago. But, yes,
What was the Greek word again?
for servant?
No, what's the word
The
that you
word's
said was
missing.
missing from all the
Rhema.
which is
Rhema.
declaration.
Declaration, decree, saying, yeah. Why, do you have a translation that has it in there?
No,
No,
I
we
got a
just-
lot of study notes going. So.
Oh, okay,
We were
okay,
just making sure we were talking about the right word.
okay. Nobody wants to use the word slave in a translation. Cultural connotations, but also just historically in English translations, it's not there in the King James, right? It go all the way back. And so what I think happens is, and I'm not trying to fault anybody specifically, although maybe just in general, is to say sometimes there's sort of like momentum in certain bodies of work. And so the momentum is to translate the word bondservant or servant, and that's just kind of what the English translations have always done. And so it literally took MacArthur like putting his foot down and saying, we're going to translate this, and we're going to put the word slave in there. And so the Legacy Standard Bible that just came out a few years ago is the only English translation I know that translates the word doulos into slave. Okay? I wonder if going all the way back to the time of the Protestant Reformation and the translations of the Bible from Wycliffe and Tyndale into English, if they just came up with saying it this way in the Geneva Bibles and the Matthew's Bible and then into the King James, and I wonder if it's just one of those things that's stuck. I don't know. I can't really. You're nodding. You know that's how that happens sometimes in translations. I don't. That's not a good excuse at all, but it might be an excuse. I don't know. I don't really have a good explanation for it. Bothers me. It bothers me that word is not in there. Go ahead, Jim.
We've taken the word slave to be an abusive relationship. Slaveholders always abuse their slaves.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
narrative that we've come to use in the last few.
We equate it with chattel slavery of the middle and later parts of the second millennium.
I'm not sure that every slave owner abused his slave.
Right.
I think that's probably not true.
Right.
But we've just taken it to be that way.
Yeah.
So if I'm a slave of God, God is abusing me,
Right. That's how people take it. That's right.
and that's not true. Of
That's
course,
right.
But we've lost the meaning of the word.
Yeah, totally, 100%. That's right. In a biblical sense, a slave would have been somebody who simply was indebted to another financially and then had to work for that person in order to pay back that debt. Now,
Yeah, but actually in the Old Testament, after that debt was paid, the slave had a choice to
Stay.
to stay. And
Right.
if they decided to stay because their master had been so amazing, they would
Yeah.
actually get that piercing of the awl, and they would be then their bondservant.
that's right. Yeah, that's
for
right.
life.
That's
I
right.
mean, it was a beautiful choice that they would return because their master was so amazing.
Yeah,
to them.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is there different like words for, like, cause okay, I mean, wasn't the Hebrew people the slaves of Egypt? Cause that was bad, right? I mean, that'd be considered a negative connotation
Yeah,
of slavery,
yep.
but I mean, is there like different tiers of words that you can use?
Bondservant
Like,
is the one that
or is it all just slave? And some of them are good or some of them are bad?
Yeah, Lindsay's right. That's part of the reason why there's some softening, like bondservant. But you hear how that works, right? You go all the way from abused slave to treasured slave to bondservant to servant. And you probably could see the biblical interpretation of the word doulos used in any of those at different times. Like think about Philemon and his slave Onesimus, right? I don't think we could find any inference in any of the New Testament writings from Paul that Philemon and Onesimus had some sort of abusive relationship. But on the other hand, Philemon did sort of like, we can reasonably infer, he sort of left not with, Onesimus left without Philemon's blessing to go and serve with Paul, and Paul sends him back, right, and says, this is where you belong, but oh, by the way, Philemon, you need to receive him back as a brother. So, like within any word that describes a social relationship, there's going to be a variance in how that sort of plays out, right? Not every relationship's going to be equal in that sense, right? Like if I just use the term, like, okay, so the biblical words are kurios and doulos, master, slave, right? There's no such thing as a kurios that doesn't have a doulos. There's no such thing as a doulos that doesn't have a kurios. Same way with disciple and rabbi, okay? If I said to you husband and wife, okay, you might say, well, that's an abusive relationship. And other people might say, no, that's a loving, caring relationship. And you might both be right in a practical sense, right? So all that to say, like, understanding the master-slave relationship, we have to understand that there's a spectrum in there, right, of varying types of relationships that would exist, anywhere from really good to really bad, and most of them probably somewhere in between. That help? Okay. Tom, finally.
Just a thought about Mary, where Gabriel said, hey, you're God's favored one. There was something about her godly character that God was favored with.
Is that how your translation reads? You are God's favored one? Oh, favored one. Greetings, oh, favored one. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, you look at verse 38, and you see that being supported in her character. Her godly character was, yeah, whatever you say, have that be done to me.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that the same godly character that we started out with, hearing about her, she was favored in God's sight. She's showing that character and agreeing to whatever's going to happen.
All right. Here's what I think. Okay. I think the word favor in 28 and the word favor in 30, because they are the root of the word grace. Okay. Grace is a gift bestowed for no reason on our part. It's God's grace bestowed to us. Okay. In the same way, there was nothing about Mary that God said, oh, I'm going to choose her for that reason. Did Mary demonstrate the character necessary to go about this? Yes, of course. From now on, all generations will call me blessed. Right? That's in her song. But the favor God shows both there and in 30 and in her life and in Joseph's life and all the other lives that are touched as part of the story are God's favor placed upon them for no other reason than God places it upon them. That's what I would say.
Verse 15, where John the Holy Spirit came on him while he was still in his mother's womb. He didn't do anything to earn that favor.
Same. Exactly right. Exactly right. That's what I would say about Mary too. I think that's a really, really important doctrine to recognize. What is our doctrine of Mary? If we start placing Mary as some sort of superior woman prior to God's favor falling upon her, boy, you can fall right to the veneration of Mary afterwards pretty easily. Right? We have to recognize who she was, why God's favor fell upon her, and then how she responded from it. But I don't see any exceptional character in Mary that caused this. I don't see that explained anywhere. It's simply, this is how God did it, and she received it.
So calling her favored one, that's the one I chose.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, in the same way that God calls Israel his people, right? Like, same way. Mary simply receives the grace of God in this regard. I mean, look, there's a lot of ways to look at this. Did Mary receive the grace of God by having to go through this? Well, you would have to answer yes and no. All right? From now on, all generations will call me blessed, but my life's going to be awful for a while.
At least 9 months.
No, I think longer.
Well, that's true.
I think longer, because that stigma would have stuck with her. And about the time the stigma probably about to wear off, when he turns about 30, then all of a sudden he starts his public ministry. Everybody hates him. And she's standing there at Golgotha when he's crucified. So, I mean, think about it. Think about Mary. I mean, I don't know if this goes through her mind, but you're standing there watching your son crucified, whom the Lord declared to you as the Messiah of all, right? And you remembered that he said through Gabriel, you're the favored one. I guarantee you somewhere in her mind, she's like, I'm not so sure about that. All right, Marion and then Jacob.
When you talk about engagement,
Yeah.
in Greece, when we went there, the two fathers got together
Yep.
and worked up the dowry.
Yep. Wait, this was still going on when you moved there?
Yes.
Wow.
And, then they had.
Listen up, Jacob.
They had a meeting in their home where the priest or the pastor would come.
Yeah.
The evangelical church would not give you communion if you broke an engagement.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it was really serious.
Yeah. Engagement's not the right word. Did I use that word today?
Well, betrothal.
Betrothal. Okay. See, I try to stay away from the word engagement for the same reason we try to stay from the other words, because betrothal and engagement, those two things are not really related entities. The only thing that you could say they're related entities is that they're two people that are preparing for marriage, but that are not yet married yet. They're heading towards that. That's why I thought it was worth talking about that for a few minutes. Like, I think a fascinating part of this is that they are not yet married, yet Gabriel, assuming it's Gabriel, goes and speaks to Joseph. Why? Because she's already now belonging to Joseph at this point. It's really a fascinating part of
Well,
this.
because he could have gotten rid of her quietly.
Quietly, which he thought about doing. But as Marion said,
publicly.
or publicly, but as Marion said, like, you couldn't just break those things off. Like, the fact that she was betrothed to Joseph meant that in order to break it off, he now would have to go to her father, explain what happened, and there would be this big deal, right? Like, breaking an engagement today, I understand, not like the simplest thing, but infinitely easier than that. Infinitely easier than that. So the fact that it says that she is betrothed to Joseph and the angel appears to Joseph speaks a lot about how the Bible speaks of the home and of marriage and all of those things. Really, really fascinating part of this, I think. I don't think I used the word engagement on purpose. On purpose. Hold on, Jacob. You want to?
Go to them, because mine's like, it's not off topic, it's related, but.
Well, this is the place for it. Go ahead, Kurt.
Usually they do what their version of divorce papers would have been with betrothal.
You would have had to have done that, right? Exactly. One.
It was illegal.
It most certainly was, because a dowry had already been placed and given and all of those things. All of that transaction had already taken place. Because if you remember, it says that Joseph was planning to divorce her quietly. That wasn't just separate from her, that was actually to break those things. So, yeah, there was, it was just much more involved, legal, relational, all of those things than what we understand even modern engagement to be. That's why I really try to avoid that word, because because we do sort of like, we do think of those things that way, but they're not really equatable entities. All right, you ready?
Yeah, okay, mine goes back to like the whole favored thing.
Okay.
What would you say about like Noah in Genesis 6 when it says like Noah, or wait, what did it? Yeah, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Like, how's that,
Obvious grace.
you know?
Wait, I don't understand what you're asking.
Like, because
Well,
you're
you're
saying that it's
saying that-
only, like, there's nothing that Mary did that was gracious, and I don't necessarily disagree, it was just a gracious act of God, which I don't necessarily disagree, but what would you say about Noah? Because it,
I see.
yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Noah found
Same-
grace in the eyes of the
Same as
Lord?
verse 15.
It's the same word, right?
Same word?
Yeah, well, that's a Hebrew word. We're talking about Greek words, but it's the same idea being communicated. Favor, grace, that those are really interchangeable concepts, biblically speaking. All right, Tom, go ahead.
Same as verse 15. John, before he was born, the Holy Spirit came on him, so he was chosen before he was born. God found favor in John
Yeah,
before he was born.
yeah.
He didn't do anything. He found favor because that's how he did it.
I get to answer first.
I would like, to, but it literally says right after that Noah was a righteous man.
Yes, okay. She gave me a chance to answer.
Well, I'm just saying.
Noah was a righteous man, upright in the eyes of the Lord in a crooked and wicked generation, right? We're also told that such as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be when the Son of Man returns, right? Wickedness, crooked. So, part of the way we think about stuff like this is we say, well, Noah was better than the rest of them. What? Well, I think he was.
Well, like,
Hold on, let me finish my answer here. Listen, everybody else in this class lets me answer before I...
you're my dad.
Yes, I know, I'm your dad, I know. So in a comparative sense, I think we can reasonably say Noah was more righteous than the rest of the wicked generation around him. And that's saying something, because there was a lot of people on earth then. Okay, I'm still answering.
Yeah, I was just I said it to Mom, not to you.
But that doesn't make Noah righteous to garner the favor and grace of God. That's not what that's saying.
Right, that's what yeah.
God placed his favor upon Noah, his grace upon Noah to do the work that God intended for Noah to do for no other reason than that's what God chose to do. Okay?
I just make sure.
In the same way that God chose Noah, is in the same way he chose Abraham, is in the same way he chose Jacob, is in the same way he chose the Israelite people, the same way he made the nation of God, the people that would reject him and do all that. I mean, look, think about Noah's life, right? He's a preacher of righteousness. He spends all these years building this boat. He gets on the boat. God does what he does. And it's not even minutes after he gets out the boat, Noah's acting out. Right? So, at least from a way this plays out sense, it'd be hard to see like, oh, God chose Noah because, that's...
Yes, but it's very hard to separate the sovereignty of God, because he obviously knows who he's choosing. But
Sure.
those that he then chooses, they are demonstrating the fruit and obedience of one who believes in
In
God.
any of those conversations, we should always say there's going to be a way to look at it through the lens of sovereignty, and there's going to be a way to look at it through the lens of humanity and through time and human action and all those things. And we should recognize that at times it's hard to reconcile those two things together, and that's maybe on purpose.
I mean, so obviously, like, yes, God chose Mary, but at the same time, you can
Yeah.
see Mary's heart in her response as a 14-year-old girl who would respond like that.
Correct. I see your hand. You can put it down.
And then just a couple verses later, it says, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased. There's obviously something about her life and her obedience and her whatever. So I think that you've gotta put those together.
Again, no.
What line goes along with that?
Go ahead.
Okay, so couldn't you just say that, like, in a simple way, just because, like, Noah was righteous and Mary had, like, a tremendous faith, does God chose them regardless of that, not because of that?
No, he chose them before. No.
Well, right, that's kind of my point. Like,
Can I say it this way? It's much easier to think of it this way in my mind.
All right, well,
God chooses, decrees, ordains simply because of his sovereign purposes, apart from anything man says, does, or otherwise. Okay? When sin entered the world, it wasn't some big surprise to God, and now he's got to figure out what to do, right? All these things come to pass because it comes to pass. But at the same time, we should recognize that even before these things take place in Mary's life, or all the things took place in Noah's life, God's work in their lives was taking place so that they weren't prepared for it.
no, that was kind of.
So can you say, well, God chose them because of who they were? Well, in some ways, but he prepared them to be that person,
Right. It's
right?
Like, yeah, because he made them into who they are, so it's not like they did
Right?
anything before.
Can we say that?
Yeah.
So in all those pieces, no matter which way you parse that out, you see the sovereign hand of God, you see him choosing according to his sovereignty, and you see us having to live and act and work in righteousness like we're called to do.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, that's just what I was just wanting to clear that up.
Boy, I tell you what I didn't have is talking about Noah and the ark on my bingo card for this morning. Goodness sakes.
You just gotta work on your cross-references.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kurt.
My thought was, when God separates out his clay lumps and picks which lump he's going to have favor towards,
This is referring to Romans 9.
the lumps are indistinguishable.
Yes.
So he's choosing favor on a lump, but it's from the same lump as the other lump, and that's just what he decided to do.
Couldn't have said it better myself. If you don't know what he's saying, does the potter or does the clay have the right to say to the potter this or that, or why did you do this? No. From the same clay, he makes some vessels for destruction and some vessels for glory.
He doesn't decide after the vessels are made.
Yeah, and see if they're good or not.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other cross references you want to talk about?
I could probably whip a couple out.
Enoch,
Thought about it actually.
Which one? Who you want to bring up?
Esau.
Esau? I was thinking more like I was thinking more like along the lines of the prophets, or even the apostles. Well,
For what?
I mean, just think about the apostles for a second. Who they are in their backgrounds, makeup, education, all those things, all of us would be like, why them? Right? Why Matthew the tax collector? Why Simon the zealot? Why? Why a bunch of uneducated fishermen who obviously didn't make it through middle school, rabbi school? Right? Like, why? But then you say, oh, well, he trains them and he molds them and he brings them up, right? And he shapes them, all these things. But then later on, they're leaving, they're deserting him, they're denying him, they're doing all these things, right? And eventually, we're going to get to it. Eventually, he's like, hey, you know what? You didn't choose to do this. I chose you for this. Jesus says that to him. Why? We don't know. He doesn't make it clear why. He doesn't say to us, well, I chose a bunch of fishermen because I knew you guys were uneducated, and if you'd been educated, you'd been educated the wrong way. But so rather than having to re-educate you, I could just bring you up on the things that are true. He doesn't say that. We don't know. We don't know why he chose them. He just says, this wasn't of your choosing. This was mine. I chose you to do this. Well, you could do that throughout all biblical history. Why Mary? Why Joseph?
Yeah.
I don't know. What?
Find it in another one.
Okay. Go ahead, Tom.
Bottom line, they were all chosen before the foundation of the world. Mary, God didn't decide after her birth that she was gonna do this. Before the foundation of the world, she was born into this world for this purpose, just like John was. And all of us who are believers, before the foundation of the world, he chose us, he chose them, and,
How all that works, I don't know. And what the purposes of God are in doing all those things, I don't know. But to trust in the goodness, the sovereign goodness of God means that we have to trust that his purposes are better than ours. And our understanding of those things is inadequate where his is adequate. You know, we have to trust in all those things. And we have to trust that he has promised good for those on whom his favor rests, whatever that looks like. We don't really understand why or how. You could drive yourself mad trying to figure out why Mary, why Joseph, why this, why that. You just drive yourself nuts trying to answer those questions. Why anything?
And for what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, and we try to do that. This is kind of off topic, but we try to do that all the time. Be like, oh, now I know why God did this. No, you know like this much about why God did this. You might see one small result of why you went through a red light and then the car behind you got smashed, right? You'd be like, oh, now I know. Okay, fine. But do you understand like the interweaving of providential events by God? Like we know this much, and God is working together all things for the good of those who love him. That's why I'm not sure like the why question is always helpful necessarily. Like there's a lot of ways to look at it,
Not
right?
on the scale of like the world, because it's easy for us to look at our own little bubble and say, oh yeah, the sovereignty, I can see the providence,
Mm-hmm.
but the providence is all over, it's like over billions of people, over
More,
thousands of
yeah,
years.
that's right,
All of it together.
Right.
It's like it happened, it already happened,
right.
and we're just watching it.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it. How many people, Jim? 8 billion right now?
I think we just crossed 8 billion.
Yeah. If I ever need data, I go to Jim because he is. Yeah, but like start doing the math about how many people have lived. Yeah, exactly. Over history. Now you're talking about an exponent of 8 billion somehow, right? Like you start asking the hows and the whys of some of that stuff, like you're gonna drive yourself crazy. I don't know. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, God's orchestrated all this in minute detail. He calls us to obey, to respond. What does my obedience have to do with it if he's got it all figured out in advance?
It's a good question, isn't it?
But no doubt, he's asked me to obey.
Both truths are sitting there side by side, and we have to recognize them, right? I think that's an important part of it. Here's another one I was thinking of. Galatians 4, I just quoted this. When the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son to be born of a woman, born into the law, right? Why was that the fullness of time? I don't know.
What does that mean, fullness of time?
I don't know.
Is that a Greek word?
Hold on, I'll tell you in a second. I do have an answer for that. Go ahead.
At least we know though, like with the Jews having to remain in Egypt, that God said the fullness of the Amalekites was it? It's not yet full.
Yeah.
The wickedness.
Wickedness,
of
yeah, full, yeah.
So we know that's why they had to stay. I mean, God has it all figured out.
A better way of looking at the fullness of time as a phrase is the same way as that is sort of the completeness of time.
Yeah.
The wickedness of the Amalekites will be complete, right? So whatever level of wickedness they needed to reach in order for the other events to then take place, they reached it. Okay, so when the completeness of time came, okay, whatever that means is something along the lines of God has ordained and decreed all of these things, spoken through the prophets for all these things to take place. Malachi lives, preaches, prophesies, writes his prophecy, and that's it. 400 years of silence, right? And now the people of God who have been chosen by God, given the land, all of these things, spoken to by the prophets, had David reign as king, Solomon as king, all through that history. Now they have not heard from God for 400 years. Okay? When you read those words of Isaiah 9, the people who dwelt in great darkness, that is, I believe, an ascription not only to the wickedness that would have existed in the generation, but also the darkness of God not speaking to them for so long. And out of that, when the completeness of God's decree was full, then God said, this is the time. That's the best way to understand that. But you still ask why. Why then? Well, it's hard to answer. And we don't need to answer that necessarily. All right. What else? We got a few more minutes. Hey, welcome back, Phil. Didn't even see you come in. You been here the whole time?
When's the last time you had your eyes checked?
It's been a while, actually. Yes, sir.
And there's like the fullness of the Gentiles. Does that mean like the fullness, like when the church is done? Remember that verse? Where is it? Is that in Galatians? I don't remember. Like the.
Well, anytime you see that phrase,
Yeah.
just remember it's talking about completeness, right? If I said my cup is full, we could also say it's completely filled, right? Like you've completed the space in between. That's kind of what that's indicating, right? So when it's been filled up to its full amount. That's when that word fullness, or you see that phrase fullness is used, that's what it's talking about. Yeah. What else? Nothing else, huh? Anybody want to talk about Gabriel and Daniel 9? That's good? You like that part? We don't have a lot of record of stuff like that. Angels visiting and knowing their names and
How tall is Gabriel?
see, you got to start talking to Fortosis. He would be like, "Do you think Gabriel was?" And then he would give me some crazy answer that I would have to respond to. Yes, ma'am.
I observed like that both Zechariah and Mary kind of had the same response, like, how will this be? But yet Zechariah was punished for it, but Mary wasn't. But it seemed that, do you think that Gabriel discerned?
Do you see how she did that?
Because Zechariah, in Luke 1, verse 20, he said, "Behold, you will be silent, unable to speak, because you did not believe my words." Do you think that Gabriel was able to discern that Zechariah didn't believe?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good speculation. I was reading a little bit about this week. Like, why Zechariah this way? Why Mary that way? We're not told exactly. The best that any writer I saw could come up with, and the best that I could say to you, Heidi, is the question that Mary asks in verse 34 is something along the lines of, well, how's that going to work out, right? How's this going to come to pass since I'm a virgin? Zechariah is saying there's no way that can happen. I realize that's not entirely fair, because if you look in verse 18 and then in verse 34, the answers aren't entirely different. So it has to be something about belief, faith, acceptance, and the nature of the response being communicated. What that looks like exactly, it's hard to say. But that's the best anybody can really come up with, right? Yes, ma'am.
But there's something else. Zechariah should have known that Sarah and Abraham had the same type of miracle.
Yeah, somebody did try to make a connection that Zechariah, being a priest in the temple, should have afforded him a greater understanding of that. But I that answer isn't totally satisfying to me, that Zechariah should have known. Like, I don't know. I don't like that answer, because like you sort of get into like degrees of like well, your faith should be greater because, now we're just like chasing our tail a little bit with some of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, should Zechariah should he have had a better understanding of the promises of God and how they would come to pass? And of course, Mary's 14 or 15 years old, probably, right? Of course, he should have a better understanding. Zechariah's old, been a priest for his whole life. Like, fine. But look, if Zechariah, as a priest in the temple, is representative of Israel as a nation in some sense, his defiance would have been greater than Mary's. Right? First century Judaism was not particularly like a faithful, good practicing thing necessarily. That's all I would say about that. Yeah, Jim. Why Zechariah?
So Gabriel
He's a
said,
faithful priest.
Gabriel said,
But who's only faithful? is God.
Zechariah, you and your wife are going to have a baby. And they know how that works. A husband and wife
Right.
have a baby. So Gabriel comes to Mary and says, you're going to get pregnant.
Yeah.
Appropriately. How am I going to get pregnant?
Yeah. 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 That's very much the difference in the questions,
How am I gonna
probably.
get pregnant? Okay. I'm not married,
Right.
but it usually takes a husband.
Right. Right.
Her question was legitimate.
Yeah, I think that's the best way of seeing it. I think that's a really good way of explaining it too. Like, there were natural yet seemingly impossible means for Zechariah and Elizabeth. That did not exist for Mary as of yet. Does that help, Heidi? Your dad's answer is better than mine.
You know, I was just wondering if Gabriel was, I mean, yes, all those things are helpful. I was wondering if Gabriel had any discernment into the hearts of men.
Oh boy.
Do you think?
That was more of,
Do I think angels have discernments into the heart of man?
I would
Discernment?
think probably not, right? God gave him that.
Yeah, that's what I would say. We don't have any biblical reference to say angels can understand the hearts of men as God does. Yet, how angels know things and how they operate, I think we should decidedly leave in the realm of the mysterious in many ways. Yeah, go ahead.
I think Gabriel was saying that God told him.
Which is one of my least favorite phrases on earth, but in this case, it's a good phrase.
I stand in the presence of God.
Yeah.
I have been sent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. The word angelos means heavenly messenger. The angels brought the message directly from God, right? That was their purpose. You know, and look, I understand, like, there's this different role of angels, like Jesus in the garden saying, I could call on a legion of angels to come, right? We know that after his temptation, the angels were ministered. Like, I understand that there's some other work and purposes of angels. I get all that. But if we understand their purpose simply from their name, they are heavenly messengers, meaning God communicates to them and through them. I don't know. That's the best we could say, I think. Anything else? We just got more questions and answers?
Kinda. Controversial second hour.
It wouldn't be second hour if we didn't have that. Kurt, you want a last word there? You want to say something? No? All right. All right, guys, don't forget about Christmas concert tonight. Tom, are there a couple cards sitting back there behind you? If you guys want a card to give to a neighbor or something, there's some there. And if we run out, I printed some more this morning and I never cut them, so we'd be glad to cut some and give them to you. I think the Anderson family has given out more than 100 cards this week. That's pretty good. Pretty excited about that. Well, that's good. We invited all the neighbors around the church. That's a good thing. But if you want to invite a neighbor around your house, that would be awesome, both for tonight, but then also to communion service on Friday and Sunday morning service next week. Let me just say one thing about that. I didn't say anything in the service, but I'll say something about that. What's so funny?
Your son's grounded from Sunday school.
Okay.
He's no longer allowed to come.
There are significant number of churches canceling church next Sunday because it's on Christmas. So you very well might have a neighbor or a friend who goes to church that doesn't have a place to go next week. And if for no other reason, invite them just so they could come and be at church on Christmas morning. Okay? Yeah, Joseph.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's not about what we are studying today,
Yeah.
but it's in the book of Samuel.
Okay.
Samuel set a day to go see Saul.
Yeah.
And he did not go that day.
Yeah.
And Saul made sacrifice.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
There's whole books written about this, you know.
And Saul was guilty.
Yeah.
And God rebuked. I mean, Samuel himself, when he came, he said you did a stupid thing. and all
Right.
that. Why Samuel didn't go on time?
Okay. This is a really long answer that I'm going to try to give in like 2 minutes, okay? We should recognize what obedience to God looks like, what good is, what sin is, and be clear about those things. Okay? Without equivocation on that. Okay? Meaning, sin is sin. Evil is evil. Disobedience is disobedience. Okay? Period. End of sentence. New paragraph. Ready? Yet somehow, Joseph, God, knowing all those things and having a foreordained plan for the world, uses and works all those things together for good and for his sovereign purposes, even our sinfulness, which is our responsibility. Should Samuel have gone? I think so. Should Saul have made that sacrifice? We can recognize all those things as disobedience, but we can also recognize that all those things coming to pass were God's purposes for his plan. And how that works, I'm perfectly happy to leave up in the realm of mystery, because I don't understand that. But that's okay with me. Okay? Does that make sense? That's why I think it's very clear to recognize what is sin, what's disobedience, what is good, what is obedience, what does that look like, right? But also say, I mean, look, if God wanted Samuel to go, he would have caused him to go. If he didn't want Samuel to sin, and that was just outside of God's plan, then he could have just pulverized Samuel and made him not exist anymore, right? Or Saul, either one. My point is that God knows we're going to sin before we sin, yet he allows us to do it. True? So, sin exists because God, in some sense, ordains for it to exist and uses it for his purposes. Does that help answer your question?
It's hard to understand. Which especially when you say, God knows that we will sin, and he allows us to sin.
Yeah.
That's hard for me to understand too.
You don't, yeah. It's a hard one to understand, isn't it? Does God know the sin you're going to do tomorrow? But he allows you to do it.
That's a problem.
Yet somehow, part of his plan. And look, we all know many stories of how God used great evil to bring about great good. Right? How does that work? Me either.
Some people are saying that even the trouble in Ukraine, God is behind it. He's using Putin to do what he's doing. We don't know.
Okay, again, this is why it's really important what I said. Evil is evil, Joseph. Sin is sin. Disobedience to God, opposition to God, all those things, we should call it that. But do I believe that God uses Putin and whatever that guy's name that's the president of Ukraine, what's his name, Jim? Zelensky? Who's Netanyahu? Oh, that was the guy from Israel. Do I believe that God had his purposes in Hitler? Yes. You know how I know that? I think Pharaoh was way worse than Hitler. But it's very clear Pharaoh was used for God's purposes, wasn't it? The Bible says that very plainly. Evil, disobedience, sin, all those things, they are what we should call them. Okay? And let's call them that. Let's call Putin evil. That's fine. let's also say that God uses Putin for his purposes.
And at the same time, we pray that God will do something to stop the war.
100%. No question. Pray that God would stop evil. 100%. And if you come up with an answer how we reconcile all that, Joseph, let me know. You can teach me. I promise. All right. All right, let's pray. We can close our time. Thanks, God, for this time together. Thanks for a chance to remember Advent of Christ this Sunday morning. And Father, I pray that our hearts and minds would be full, not just of the wonderful things of this Christmas season, but primarily of the truth of the coming of Christ, truth of the Word being made flesh and dwelling amongst us for our salvation. Bless us with the knowledge of those things we ask. It may be for your glory. In Christ's name, amen. All right, thank you, everybody.